Welcome to Crypto in America Live, the only show bringing you candid conversations on the biggest news stories, legal issues, and policy developments shaping the crypto world. Every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern. It was another big week for crypto policy in DC, coinciding with the final trading week of the year. Congress heads home today, but negotiations will continue over the break ahead of a market structure markup in January. We got that news from crypto AI and crypto AI czar, David Sachs, on Twitter last night, causing I think a bit of happiness in the space. We were pretty upset about the non-markup this year, but we'll be getting it in January, according to Mr. Sachs. So, without further ado, we'll get into more of that. But hi, Jacqueline. Hi, Gerald.
Happy
Hey, Ellie,
Friday.
how are you? Happy Friday. Happy almost Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Ellie, I have to shout out how festive your background is.
Yeah, she's
It's
got the
incredible.
best setup.
It's full
Seriously,
on. That
so
is the
good. Yes,
American dream right there,
I
just
love it.
in a backdrop.
We get very Christmassy at my house, so looking forward to it. I don't know. Have you guys watched any Christmas movies yet? I haven't. I've been behind on that.
I love Elf. That's like one I always put on, and
That's a
then
good one.
Christmas Lampoon. You know that one?
Yeah,
I've never
National
seen that
Lampoon
one.
Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Gerald. The
Yeah,
formal
yeah.
title, yes.
Yeah. No, that's a good one. Yeah, we got into it last night. We watched the Christmas Chronicles. I forgot how sad that movie is. Have you guys ever seen that? It's okay. We don't
No.
have to. We have too much to cover, but yeah, a lot of good.
That's what today's segment's about, Christmas
Yeah.
movies. Yeah.
We'll do a whole, maybe after if we're going to do a show on Boxing Day, maybe we'll
Yeah.
talk about our favorite Christmas movies and
Mhm.
such. We can
There
figure
you
it out.
You can make it warm. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, we've got another stacked show for you guys today. We're going to cover all of what I mentioned before, plus the changing of the guard at the CFTC and the latest from the crypto ecosystem this week with our guests, Katherine Kirkpatrick Boss. She's the general counsel at StarkWare. We also have Brian Smith. He's the president of the Jito Foundation. And of course, Cody Carbone, a friend of the show, the CEO of the Digital Chamber. We're breaking down all the policy initiatives going on Capitol Hill this week. But first, a headline roundup. The Senate confirmed Mike Seelig as the new chairman of the CFTC just last night, while the acting CFTC chair, Caroline Pham, is set to join MoonPay in the new year as its chief legal officer and administrative officer. Now, we've been talking about this for quite a while. I reported back in August that rumors were swirling that Caroline was going to go to MoonPay. MoonPay didn't deny it to me at the time in August when I reached out for a comment. So I'll say I broke that story first in August, and then
We'll concur with that, Ellie.
We claim it.
That's an Ellie
I'll claim it.
exclusive in our eyes.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a good move. Obviously, we've got Mike Seelig taking over, very pro crypto regulator that Pham has left him. His SEC connections and relationship with Atkins, I think, will bring the two agencies even closer together as well. But some good moves at the
Yeah, for
CFTC this week, guys.
For the
Yeah.
people who don't know Mike Seelig, can you guys give kind of just like a short breakdown of maybe who he is and why this is positive for the crypto space?
Yeah, so this is, I think, super positive for both the CFTC and for the industry just looking for the SEC and CFTC to be aligned as regulators. So Mike was general counsel to Chair Atkins in the SEC, long history of doing great work, and obviously like very plugged into the industry's kind of needs and asks to get regulatory clarity from the CFTC. And
kind of back and forth wondering if we were ever going to get a CFTC chair
Yeah.
in place this year. So just as the legislative calendar comes to an end, Mike gets put in the seat. So it will be interesting to watch his movements as chair. How long did chairman at the CFTC? How long is the term, Gerald? Do you know?
Oh no, you put me on the spot.
Sorry.
off the top of my head, I don't actually know. I should know.
I know. I should know
Yeah.
too. All right. We'll
It's
come back to that.
5 years. 5 years.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
There
I
we go.
think, yeah.
I phoned a friend called Google.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. All
So
right. Well,
Michael will serve through April 2029.
gosh, what will we all
That's
be
the
doing in
plan.
29?
You know, God willing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
plan.
29.
You know, God willing. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Another big story this week was Coinbase announced their highly anticipated system update. It was announced on Wednesday, and the US's largest crypto exchange said it's going to get into stocks and prediction markets and advisory services. And basically, this is all just one big bid to become a quote unquote super app, right? Or just a one-stop shop trading app. So I think a lot of people were anticipating this. I know, Jacqueline, you were pretty disappointed not to see a base token. So I saw your tweet on
I
that.
just wanted to see what would happen to the world if we got a base token, you know, and everyone was kind of speculating that. Like they've been talking
Yeah.
about this December 17th announcement for a while now. And
Yep.
I had a feeling there would be the prediction market side to it because literally everyone is getting into prediction markets. I had a feeling there'd be some stock component because it puts it up against Robinhood and other, I guess, financial apps out there. But
Gemini now too. Gemini's getting into
yeah,
prediction
Gemini as
markets.
well.
Yeah,
But
I think we're all going to end up working for Coinbase or Robinhood one way or the other at some point. But yeah, really exciting. I mean, they've been pushing toward phase of Coinbase. It's crazy. I remember like back in 2017, 18, when it was just basically buy, sell crypto, and there were like 5 tokens listed, and they just had like the smoothest UX. And to see them get to this point, just as a super app and everything app, given all the battles they've fought, it's interesting to see them, go after it.
yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
wild. They also had the Coinbase business arm too, which was like an all-in-one financial platform, as they call it, for startups and small businesses. So there's that, the advisory side, which I'm not so sure about the advisory thing. It's like AI-powered advisory for financial management. So you could kind of message it and be like, I have these tokens. What's a better place to allocate it? And then I could like give you recommendations of where you should move your funds. That's like a high-level version of it, but it's strange. I feel like everything now has prediction markets, AI, and some like perp component.
Yeah,
That's what I
Yeah.
keep seeing. I think I'm getting a little tired, but I also see, what the market wants is what the market gets. So
yeah, and I think that's also something that TradFi has been trying to figure out as well, like the AI advisory side of financial management, even if it's just sort of like vague data gathering. It's like an interesting product feature. We still don't have AI trading for you. I think that's the next step, but
That'll be the
we'll see how
next
it
thing.
goes. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think some big news from the Fed this morning was that we finally sort of have a timeline as to those skinny master accounts that we talked to Fed Governor Waller about back in October. They rolled out a plan for soliciting basically public feedback on that proposal. Skinny master accounts, if you guys remember our interview, is basically like a watered down version of a full master account. Doesn't have all the bells and whistles that a full master account does, but it will allow eligible firms, particularly these crypto firms who want to focus on payments, to be able to access the Fed's payment rails. And that's been a really controversial thing for the last couple of years. Gerald, remind our listeners why this could be such a big deal for crypto. Is it basically just because they can kind of get into sort of the Fed's payment rails at this point, and it'll be better for them to not have to partner with outside banks, cheaper, faster, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We kind of dug into this with the SoFi CEO as well, just on being like a full Fed master account and the access that gives you versus this skinny version. Like there's basically 3 tiers of access to the Fed. Crypto firms have usually been put in tier 3, which is pretty risk on and doesn't give you. So if you had direct access to a Fed master account, you could mint and redeem stables in real time. You could access all the Fed rails. You'd be FDIC insured on those deposits. And so the industry, I think it's like a step in the right direction, but maybe a little less than the industry would want to see. And then I think also SBDI, so the Wyoming SBDI is kind of left out of the loop here, just on direct Fed access. So we'll see kind of how this plays out, but it's a step in the right direction. And it's just this continual blending of realizing that like these institutions have the compliance function, the custodial functions, all these things that they need to do to have and hold and move these assets. And so, yeah, hopefully we'll get sort of full access in the future. But the skinny master is like a good start, I think.
Well, it's interesting timing this week as well, because the Fed also rolled back that guidance from 2023 that actually stopped the tier 3, or basically the uninsured member banks, state member banks, from engaging in crypto activity. And you mentioned the Speedies, like Custodia, when it was denied a master account in 2023. This was sort of part of the base case for why the Fed did deny them, because they were quote unquote tier 3, uninsured. And the Fed had this guidance that basically said, we don't we don't cater to banks that have this status. So now that the Fed has rolled that back as well, this could open up a whole new realm of possibilities for Custodia, although it is fighting its own battle with the Fed currently in a court, but we'll see. We'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
So good things from the Fed this week. Last but not least, the traditional exchanges are catching up to crypto's 24/7 markets. NASDAQ, its latest push to announce plans to extend trading to 23 hours a day, 5 days a week.
Wow.
And this is in response to novel. This is in response to demand from overseas players actually wanting to get in on US stocks. So this reminds me, we had the NASDAQ's head of North American markets, Kevin Kennedy, on our show a couple weeks ago. And I remember he said that he was sort of the most excited about this initiative out of like anything else that is kind of coming, coming onto the NASDAQ's purview with crypto in the next year or so. He said they spent a terrific amount of time thinking about 24/7 trading markets, and they hope to expand to 24/7 at some point. And he really thinks it's sort of the foundational part of trading in digital assets. So it's just another step forward to catching up with crypto, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. I actually had a conversation at Solana Breakpoint with Mark Greenberg, who is the global head of consumer apps at Kraken. And he was talking about the expansion towards, 24/7 of traditional stocks and trading and all these things. And I said, why do you think it's so important? Right. Obviously, we see this in crypto and it gives you kind of like a global access. But he was kind of saying, sometimes people, when you come home from work, you can't even access it in the current market state. And so even just being able to have that after work hours, so to speak, access to stocks is a huge upside. And it kind of opens up, the market opportunity there for the people who are not day trading at their jobs, but like to move money around. So I think it's the right way for it. I joke about it all the time because like crypto has been 24/7 the whole time, but markets should evolve, technology should advance. And I think this is a good step forward for NASDAQ.
Yeah, it's really interesting. This reminded me of a story that one of my professors in law school told me about a company that he had advised that IPO'd, and there's like lockups that go into the timing here. There's all kinds of stuff that happens, in liquid markets. He actually had to call a broker in Japan and sell his unlocked IPO shares like prior to the US market opening. And so it's one of those things like kind of a no-brainer. Obviously requires some like technical updates. We'll see how this can potentially play into like when more actual stocks are tokenized. Like that's the next big upgrade for the rails that I think we need to see, because a lot of the time now we're just talking about a redemption right for a share. We're talking about instruments that are not actually like equity trading. And so to see NASDAQ kind of continue to embrace, and you mentioned like the global pressure to be able to do stuff like this, it makes a lot of sense. America, deepest, most liquid markets. We should have the most active trading. And then I know degens are like, what are we doing with that last hour in the day? Like, what is the 23?
I know. Are they just resetting the systems and making sure everything's still running?
Yeah.
I was wondering the same thing. I was like 23/5. Okay. Like 5 I get, maybe.
They got to sweep the floor,
7.
down on the NASDAQ floor. They need some time
Everyone's gotta
to
clean
turn
up.
over the
Yeah.
tables. Yeah.
Yeah, the global perspective, you know what I was also thinking just quickly on this? Like also people out in California, right? The markets close for them at 1 p.m.
Oh, yeah.
So
The time
it's
zone differences.
the time zone difference. It's always been, I think, a point of, contention for people out in California. It's like, okay, well, for us, the markets close middle of the day. So it'll just be another step in the right direction there as well. But with that said, talking about steps in the right direction, the SEC held a public roundtable on financial privacy and surveillance this week as regulators grapple with what privacy should look like in an increasingly on-chain financial world. Joining us now is StarkWare GC Katherine Kirkpatrick Boss, who spoke on the panel, emphasizing why privacy technology is becoming essential for markets, consumers, and responsible innovation when it comes to crypto. Katherine, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome. Good to see you.
I'm honored to be on because, as Gerald knows, I'm a big fan of this pod, and honestly, I just feel like I'm hanging out with the cool crew. So,
Gosh, we're honored. We're not that cool. We're not.
Just
very
take it, Jackie.
cool. I mean, there's a spectrum. Yeah.
I appreciate it, though. Katherine, first off, I mean, we're seeing the privacy debate play out in the market structure side, particularly when it comes to the treatment of DeFi. As far as the SEC goes, what is their interest here, and what kind of policies could they implement that you think would benefit consumers?
So I think a lot of people have high expectations for these roundtables, meaning takeaways and specific policies that are a result of this kind of conversation. I'm a little bit more measured. Like, I think that this is one very small step in a much larger, longer conversation. And the one thing that I hope to see from this roundtable is a better, more positive attitude vis-a-vis privacy technology in the United States. So this was discussed a lot on the roundtable, where there has been a history, and not just in the United States, but globally, of an immediate suspicion cast upon individuals using privacy technology, or more importantly, builders and developers developing privacy tools. So I think everyone was so thrilled that the SEC convened this roundtable, because it's a sign that that is hopefully not going to be kind of a pervasive attitude that builders are going to be dealing with, at least in the United States, for the next few years. Um, as to specific policies that come out of this conversation, I think that's going to take some time. And there's going to need to be a lot of education regarding how these tools work, potential risk mitigants that can be used with these tools. This is the beginning of a conversation surrounding things like zero knowledge proof technology.
Yeah, Catherine, I'm curious, that notion of like takeaways and the beginning of a conversation. So Ellie and I were at the roundtable. Great job. There were a couple friends of the show up there, and really enjoyed the debate. But one of the things that became clear to me is, we used to say this about crypto when we finally had the opportunity to talk to policymakers, right? It was like, crypto is not a monolithic set of objectives. It's not one thing that everybody wants. And I felt like with privacy as well, like we're still kind of defining what we want. So there's part of the argument is that like institutions may actually be the first sort of ZK proof case that gets there, because, you know, hedge funds and a lot of deeply liquid traders don't need their trades public on a permissionless blockchain. And then you have kind of the other side of the spectrum, sort of the cypherpunks, the crypto punks side of things, where we're talking about, no, like, you know, transactions should be anonymous. There's all kinds of emerging markets discussions. Where do you see the rubber actually hitting the road on some of these discussions moving forward? Like, where are we on that kind of spectrum?
Well, it's absolutely spot on, Gerald. So it was really interesting. The first half of the roundtable, and this is unique, this is the only one that's operated like this. It was actually builders demonstrating privacy
Demo
tools.
day. Yeah. As demo
Yeah,
day at the
yeah.
SEC. I loved it.
Demo
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved
day,
it.
love
There was a
that,
lot
yeah.
of, discussion as to, is this just builders shilling their projects? No, that was not the intent. The intent was educational. This is how this all actually works. And then the second half was a policy focused conversation. And what was really interesting is the policy panel only had two GCs, me and
Mhm.
one other general counsel. The rest of the participants were academics, ex-regulators, people with a very specific kind of grasp of policy. And so I felt like one of the things that I was hitting really hard on the panel was exactly what you referred to, meaning the economic use case for privacy. And we're at this critical point where everyone's been obsessed with tokenization, stablecoins, and payments, particularly TradFi. They're now all in, frankly, on tokenizing everything, on figuring out investment in crypto payments, rails, as you were just talking about. And what does that mean? It means as we see markets move on chain, particularly equity markets, it is ridiculous to think of the kind of transparency that we currently operate with on chain, both from a competitive free market standpoint, but also to avoid market manipulation. A lot of the other real institutional use cases that exist, they need privacy. So like there's an economic driver for that privacy. As to kind of the individual retail users seeking privacy from kind of a cypherpunk fundamental rights perspective, to be somewhat cynical, I actually don't think that that is the driving use case behind this conversation. I mean, there will always be people like that. I fully respect them, and there should be a place to support those people's desire for legal privacy. But who really needs it? It's the traders. It's the global entities.
Mhm. I also liked the reference to some of these more traditional players, maybe people outside of crypto being frankly sick of data breaches and people looking for better options to mitigate those kinds of risk, whether it's like privacy apps or encrypted messaging services. But I liked how that was brought up as sort of like this other kind of lens towards crypto, because I feel like the SEC, right, is just like bombarded with sort of crypto use cases, and as you mentioned, sort of the economic and financial use cases like day in, day out. But do you see regulators maybe responding more to that than to the privacy demands from the crypto industry, or do you think it's kind of both? They're listening to both sides.
No, I think you're right. I mean, look, we've kind of lost the thread on selective disclosure, which is the principle of only supplying the amount of information that is needed, right? And this is an issue that is far more prominent outside of crypto. Every American knows the experience of getting like a data breach letter in the mail once every other month at this point. So Americans are tired of this excessive disclosure. Like, why do you have to put your address down when there's something, when you're buying something online that has nothing to do with your physical address for verification purposes, when there's technology that exists that would avoid creating a honeypot of that personally identifiable information that's going to get hacked? And I've always found that from an advocacy perspective, when you're talking to people outside of crypto, it is really important to effectively hook them or get their interest with an example that isn't a crypto example. That's a very easily understandable, thing that affects them as a human being or their families, not necessarily a crypto technical issue. Like when you talk about zero knowledge proofs, everyone in crypto talks about this cave example that's very mathematical and, in my opinion, very academic, somewhat esoteric. And I'm a bit of a broken record where I'm like, we need to stop explaining ZK proofs with this cave. We need to put it in a very, English human way of understanding, like a real compelling use case of ZK proofs, which can protect people's data. It can create an environment that furthers physical safety through the use of zero knowledge proof technology. Then once we get them on board and interested, then you move to step 2, which is explaining how this all works technically.
Yeah. Katherine, I agree with you on that. I think on the ZK front, the example I always kind of give is like, you could say, I am within this age range, or I have this much money in my bank account between this number and this number, but like, I never need to tell you the exact number, but for verification purposes, I fit within that framework. And that's like
100%.
really all people need to know, right?
100%. And selective disclosure, like that should be the norm. It's clearly not the norm. That's a problem. That's something Chair Atkins and Commissioner Peirce both alluded to in their remarks. Commissioner Peirce started this whole conversation with her piece back in August where she was saying, why are we using a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel? And, the example I used on the panel that I use every time I talk about ZK proofs is the young woman example where, you have an attractive young woman. She's 21. She goes to buy wine and the clerk is creepy. He's hitting on her. Why does she want to provide her driver's license with her home address? And why should she, when we have the technology at our fingertips to prove that she is in fact 21 years old? And that really resonates with people, because if you're a woman, you understand that example. Men have daughters, they have wives, they understand the palpable use case for this kind of technology.
What's the cave analogy?
Honestly, it's so
Or is it just like
complicated, we don't even have time to go in it. But all cryptographers know the cave analogy. Deutsche Bank and Nethermind just published, I think last week, a great piece on ZK proofs in financial services. And I also was like, oh my gosh, like 2025, Nethermind and Deutsche Bank are working together to publish scholarship. Like my mind is blown. I recommend that people read it. But they use the cave analogy. It's effectively proving someone's in a cave. And it's like, okay, step 1, there's the
When are we ever in a cave? Yeah.
We're gonna have to go look that up.
No, I love these like Stanford Blockchain Week discussions where it's essentially like, the Merkle tree over here will abstract another layer, and then now it's like slightly better. And as you can see, like regulators and like that type of person just like eyes glaze over. I'm curious, so I have a healthcare background, fintech background before coming into crypto. And one of the things that came up on the panel is like HIPAA is a good example of where we are protecting and focusing on, medical data privacy. Crypto has been trying to solve those problems for a long time. The government, I feel like every few years puts out a new FHIR, is the terminology used for encryption of medical data, sort of standard. And then we're still going to the doctor's office and filling out those like paper forms every single time, right? So do you think we're at kind of a watershed moment where, yes, we have the technology, but also we can get some of those standards rolled out into basically other areas of Americans' lives? Like, how do you see that playing out kind of in practice? Because I know the DMV analogy was given. I think that's a great use case that they're rolling out in California. But like, where will we actually see the technology start to improve? Maybe interoperability as one step, but also just overall privacy of this kind of data.
It's a great question. And one of the really interesting parts of the roundtable was when Carol House, who's an ex-regulator, mentioned that FinCEN has said that other forms of identity are acceptable, and said that back in, I think she said 2004. And everyone on the panel kind of gave her a look like, what? And I think the big takeaway was that might be correct, but you also have a whole slew of regulated entities in financial services, in healthcare. They need very clear signaling from regulators, either through legislation or otherwise, that certain forms, alternate forms of data identity or digital identity or technology is going to be acceptable to meet their regulatory requirements. And right now, in my opinion, we don't have that. I'm the former chief legal officer of a centralized exchange that was a money services business. And we were sticking to market norms of what was required for know your client and anti-money laundering. And until we get a very clear directive from regulators, regulated entities are not going to be able to go out on a limb and experiment with this technology. So that's why I love the roundtable, because the first step is educating regulators and legislators about the forms of technology that exist, getting them excited, getting them to realize how this will improve the lives of Americans. And then you can hopefully move along like rulemaking, legislation, guidance that makes it more acceptable for regulated entities to start integrating this.
Yeah, Katherine, Hester came out with a banger, as she usually does in her opening remarks. She said, protecting one's privacy should be the norm, not an indicator of criminal intent. And like, I was just thinking, like, that's so true. I feel like people look on to, people who are so privacy focused, and it's like, oh, they must have something to hide. And it's like, no, it's just like in an age of, where we share everything pretty much online and we give our data away for free. It's pretty normal that people would want some privacy just around, not just their financial data, but also like the personal data, like they give out, like the driver's license analogy that you used. On Hester, though, I mean, she's great. She's been such a champion of the industry for so long, but she's not going to be at the SEC forever. Obviously, I think her term was actually up in this past June, but she can stay until someone is replaced or someone's confirmed in her place. Do you get the sense that she is leading the charge on the crypto task force on these privacy issues? But do you get the sense that her views are shared within the agency, or are they going to kind of fizzle out maybe when she leaves?
I was really heartened to see that both Chair Atkins and Commissioner Mark Ueda also made comments that were reflective of Hester's principles. And you're right. I mean, she has been such a champion for, frankly, embracing innovation more generally, but definitely financial surveillance and privacy. I do believe that at least, the Republican members of the commission share those sentiments. My one question mark is whether they will make it the kind of priority that Commissioner Peirce has clearly, she's clearly focused on this. She's clearly prioritized this. And I love that, because I think the driver, reading in between the lines of her August statement, is her genuine belief that this is a right that should be respected. And I always think of it and try to explain it to people is that this is a fundamental right of Americans as an expression of fundamental morals and values. It's not just privacy to hide your money. It's the fact that Americans should have the right to privacy when they engage in transactions, to donate to a religious organization, or have privacy vis-a-vis their healthcare spending. And so I think that she really believes that fundamentally on a human level. And then that has made its way into her mandate. I can't gauge how that passion resonates with the other members of the commission, but I certainly hope to see that discussion continue, because it's, one of the more important topics that we're grappling with in and out of crypto these days.
Yeah, Catherine, you mentioned sort of this fundamental right. And so for our viewers, obviously, like the Fourth Amendment protects against unlawful search and seizure, right? It is a fundamental right. But what brought up on the panel, and I think has become increasingly prevalent, is the idea that the third party doctrine is this kind of catch-all where you have a right to use services. And if you use those services, and you're giving up your right to privacy. And so you're kind of have defeated yourself. Do you see that policy changing, and I don't know that it's anything that like the Supreme Court would address, but how do we grapple with like those two things where there's this increasingly large need, like the digital assets report also advocated for some increased surveillance and some expansion of the Patriot Act that I think the industry wasn't necessarily happy with. But how does that fundamental right sort of coexist with the way, to Ellie's point, like social media and everything else works now, where you're using these services and you're giving up so much of your data kind of anyways?
It's such a hard question, Gerald, because I think it's a really difficult balance. And you're absolutely right. Like some of it's the existing norm where people give up this kind of data without even considering it, without awareness to some degree. I mean, I made that point on the panel where I looked down the panel and I said, I think all of us have some sort of app on our phone that we understand how much data this app is gathering, yet we still downloaded it, like whether it's Instagram or X or whatever. And frankly, look, there was a bit of a debate on the panel about this, but it's my opinion that most users will trade privacy for ease of UX. Now, statistically, the gentleman from the ACLU, Jay Stanley, disagreed. He said the data actually indicates that people do care about that individual privacy. But when you're balancing all this, and frankly, more pragmatically, when you're balancing national security interests of the United States versus privacy rights, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's what we saw with Tornado Cash. It became a national security issue. That's where it gets extremely difficult. But I think the way to make progress is acknowledging that we have a problem. Like the first step to fixing a problem is acknowledging that we have the problem. So the huge import of this roundtable was just acknowledging that the norm is not perfect. Like this is problematic. We need to have this conversation. We need to understand what technology exists that will help facilitate that balance. So we'll help preserve privacy, but we'll also help, theoretically, there are solutions, some of them are spicy, that, allow for privacy, but also allow for regulators to see the transactions, whether it's kind of, blockchain analytics, ZK proofs, we could go down the list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Kath, I was going to say on that point, one of the other things that on the collection side comes up is how like chain analysis and TRM and some of these other service providers are gathering that kind of data. Obviously, great national security use case for it, and they're really just tracking to wallet addresses to on and off ramps. Do you see that service increasing in frequency, or how would some of those types of services be impacted if we were to increase like these rights to privacy functionally?
Well, I think the interesting thing is there are a slew of options that exist out of and not just blockchain analytics that some builders are actively using. And the first half of the panel was great, or the roundtable was great, because it was a huge spectrum. There was kind of the Canton network, which is as pretty much as permissioned and as institutional as you can get. And then of course there was Zcash. So you really saw what exists, and Alio, which is really kind of customized privacy, which a lot of crypto does not like and does not appreciate. But there's a slew of tools like permissioned access layers or token level extensions or on-chain attestations. And some of these are provided by the big blockchain analytics providers. Others are being provided by startups in the space like Predicate, which was on the roundtable. So the real question that I think crypto needs to grapple with is, are these tools okay? Because there's definitely a cypherpunk attitude that it's like, no, we don't even want to talk about these tools because there is a fear that regulators will seize upon them and mandate them across DeFi, for example. I disagree. I co-authored a paper with Jesse Brooks back in October about the existence of these tools. And our intent in highlighting them was not to mandate them across DeFi, to be clear. I'm an ex-DeFi GC, but to make builders aware of the existence. Because look, there's a spectrum of projects in crypto, and there's a lot of projects that want to attract trad flows or regulated flows, and they're going to have to grapple with the risk to make it economically sustainable, as opposed to just kind of staying in this little pocket of retail cypherpunk engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Katherine, you're awesome. We're going to have you on for a full episode. So get ready in the new year.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
And I
coming
didn't
in.
even tell you my favorite part, which was there were donuts at the break. So, you know, the round table.
They're getting good with those swag tables. I remember, I think the DeFi one, it was what, like ice cream
They had
sandwiches or
ice
something?
cream.
It was ice cream for all the other round tables. And at
Oh,
first I
wow.
was really upset because I think the ice cream is awesome, but it was also 25 degrees in DC that day. So
Fair.
it
Read the
was
room.
donuts and cookies. So
Read
if
the
I was
room. Yeah,
acting a little
yeah,
hyper on the panel, it's because I took down a lot of sugar immediately
yeah.
beforehand. But
Catherine,
There you
thank you so much for coming on. See you
thank you
soon.
so much for having me.
We'll see you soon.
Oh, she's great. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
our next guest is Brian Smith. He is the president of the Jito Foundation. The team just announced this week that it's planning to come home and bring its operations back to the United States. And I think this really is the perfect crypto in America story. So, of course, we had to have Brian on the show. And this is his first time on Crypto in America. So, welcome on, Brian.
Hey,
Hey
Brian.
guys, thanks for
Welcome.
having me on.
Thanks for coming on. I know Lucas Rutter, the CEO of Jito Labs, announced on Wednesday in a post that this came after over a year in the trenches of policy work from Jito and a decade of lobbying and education from industry allies. Those are his words. We also say the trenches here, but that's definitely a engineer speak. Can you walk us kind of through what the journey was like to bring the foundation to the US and really what this process was for you guys? Because I'd imagine it was not as easy as like, okay, we're coming back now, right?
No, yeah, it was definitely a journey. So Jito Foundation was established in kind of like the old model that the industry was pushed to, which is you have kind of these different entities across Panama, Cayman, all of that. And, you know, a lot of legwork can get into why that's like just bad operationally for the industry and for teams. But, you know, Jito, very proactive. As soon as we saw the tides turning in DC and kind of the embrace of crypto that we've seen over the last year. One of the first teams to go in and meet with the crypto task force back in January, have had numerous discussions with the SEC. All this engagement isn't specific to just kind of like foundation onshoring, trying to get involved. You know, Jito's business, for anyone who's not familiar, you know, the leading liquid staking token on Solana, as well as kind of core block building infrastructure on Solana. And so a lot of issues that are very top of mind for kind of crypto regulators and policymakers in the industry. And so engaging across, you know, liquid staking tokens, getting that in an ETF, but then also engaging across these issues of like why the model was broken historically for crypto projects to actually operate out of the US and helping kind of embrace acceptance and educate about the friction there and how it's possible for a large project like Jito to actually operate out of the US going forward.
Yeah, so Brian, you had a great post about just basically bouncing around Switzerland when you guys were initially sort of putting all this together. I think a lot of founders and GCs in the space have gone through those trials and tribulations. I know Say launched a 501c4 at the beginning of this year to launch a U.S. foundation presence in the U.S. And then Uniswap had a different approach with putting everything kind of back under labs and going with the Duna. So I'm curious, what is the Jito Foundation? Like, if you can talk about structurally, like what you guys decided to do with that setup, and obviously it sounds like with sort of the blessing of the task force and those meetings in mind.
Yeah, so we went with a 501c4. So that was established a couple months ago, and then there's a lot of operational processes to actually move that over, but that is all in flight and starting kind of at the start calendar year 2026, just set a fresh slate then is when, you know, everything will start operating out of the 501c4 in the US. So we did a good amount of diligence, a good amount of engagement with various experts in the field. And the 501c4 is actually a pretty cool structure that accommodates many of the, you know, historical friction. And we're excited to be operating out of that going forward.
Brian, will you guys be having a headquarters in the United States, or are you guys going to be operating fully remotely and kind of just your jurisdiction will be in the United States?
Yeah, we're, you know, like most crypto companies, we are kind of remote native, and that's how it was started from day one. But, you know, there is for sure concerns about like where people are and having to, you know, almost like deprioritize certain people in America historically because of not having an onshore structure. And so I think it empowers us to, you know, prioritize the best builders to join the team, including all of those in America going forward. And it just makes, activity in the US a lot easier when you don't have to fly halfway around the world to get together as a team. And so we have certain nexus of employees in certain places like New York and San Francisco, as you would expect. But continue to be a remote company. We don't have like a formal office building, but we do have kind of office adjacent locations where people meet up and work together.
And how much of
Yeah.
your team is based outside the US, would you say?
So it's different at the Jito Foundation versus Jito Labs. Jito Labs is quite US centric. Part of this was like it was easier for Jito Labs, as a traditional C Corp as opposed to the Jito Foundation. And so Jito Labs is about 23 people. And I would say 20 or so of those are in the US. Jito Foundation is about 13 people. And I think 8 of us at the foundation are in the US.
Wow. You got your stats down, Brian.
Yes. He's
Just
prepared.
don't fact check me.
There we go. Yeah. All right. We trust you. We trust you.
Hmm.
I wanted to ask you, why do you think now is a good time compared to previous months? Obviously, you guys had to get your ducks in order when you filed these things. So it's like you couldn't have just announced this when you filed it. These things take time. But what was kind of like the impetus for you, aside from maybe, the fact that, or maybe it is the regulatory climate in the US that you were like, okay, now it's favorable, let's come back. But maybe compared to other jurisdictions, like what made Jito want to operate in the US mainly?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, happy to talk about kind of our process of like getting confidence of making this move. It's, there's a lot behind the scenes operationally to do this. And so we really, we're a large project at scale, and campaign promises are one thing. And so you really need to see the track record of like things actually happening before we kind of uproot a lot of this and move it into the US. And so that was why, it didn't happen in January, but it happened over late in the summer. And then from like an operational perspective, why it makes sense to be in the US is like the US is the best place to do business in the world, I would say. And so, when you're operating out of different offshore jurisdictions, especially kind of the Caribbean islands that are popular for crypto projects, that really limits you on your flexibility. Like they are perceived differently than the US. So like if you're onboarding to different counterparties for commercial deals, the process for a Cayman company is very different from that of a US company. There's a lot more boxes to check. Like the financial rails, and I mean, this should be irrelevant. We're like a crypto company, stable coins are accepted everywhere, but like in practice, not every vendor takes stable coins. And financial rails of a Cayman foundation are highly restrictive, especially in the prior administration, where it's like, oh, you're a Cayman crypto company, like no one will touch you. And so like making simple like overseas wires or even having like team issued credit cards is not possible as a Cayman company. And so it's like you end up having to like put charges on your personal card and like get reimbursed all the time. And so like there's day-to-day impacts across the board on people that are working for Jito. And it's like we shouldn't be a second-class citizen for our team members of like, oh, sorry, your life is harder than if you worked for a Web2 startup because you work for a crypto project trying to democratize finance. And so it's really like paramount on kind of, I think, me as leadership and the others on the team of like making their life as easy as possible to build helpful products for the world and not getting encumbered in the operational hassle that is unfortunately just inherent in what the prior structures were.
Yeah, I love the point about onboarding. I know we've experienced situations where there was a challenge for a large enterprise or like a potential partner to work with a Cayman entity, and the US is just much more functional in a lot of those ways. You also made a point about flexibility, and one of the things that's come up a lot in these discussions about onshoring is the tax implications of moving large treasuries, right? So even when you see the Duna, there's a lot of tax work to be done on, is your entire treasury taking like a 21% hit versus having assets that are offshore, and all kinds of complications that come with that nexus between the US and offshore jurisdictions. When you guys were rolling this out, did you get comfortable with the idea that the foundation treasury is going to kind of join with this US foundation? And so there's like a large asset transfer there, or we still kind of maintain that flexibility from a treasury and sort of like tax perspective?
I would say it's a balance, and you're right. Unfortunately, there's a lot of issues in how crypto is treated from a tax perspective versus just traditional kind of stock or other formation capital assets of other companies that make it, that was one of the driving factors of why people are so reluctant to operate in the US and get started in the US. And so it seems that the 501c4 structure, it makes that possible and is quite flexible. So we are, going to be paying for most of our expenses and operating all of that out of the U.S. Foundation structure. The other areas will continue to exist in some capacity, but like the goal is we continue to gain momentum. We work with policymakers, demonstrate why this is so valuable that we can actually bring more economic activity to the U.S., why we can make the industry, which is already vibrant despite what was previously a hostile kind of environment, even more vibrant in the US, and get confidence that everyone will just stop dealing with these offshore structures and have confidence to have US as the only kind of area for their business going forward. And that'll just save all of us a lot of brain damage.
Hmm. Yeah, Brian, we've seen a lot of companies either start overseas, move overseas, and then come back to the US, which is not very uncommon. But now that we have all these companies coming back, do you kind of see a future where they start here, they incorporate here, and that era of having to go overseas is over?
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, it would have, I think, made a lot of people's life easier if that was a possible route as of a couple of years ago. And so I think, frankly, like a lot of managing a foundation and being a steward for this is like risk mitigation. And so I wouldn't say, if I was like, because I have this conversation with other founders and stuff, it's like, do you solely operate in the US, or do you kind of do some of the parallel structures that we're seeing be more common? And I think there's still uncertainty. I mean, there's certainly optimism, but do you bet your entire project, and in the future, is this get more risky and that really backfires in your face, is something that each individual project will have to choose for themselves. But the goal, why we're being public about all of this, which was previously like terrifying and would never do something like this,
Yeah.
is to show the path is possible, educate people on why it's good, and create the structures where everyone can operate solely out of the US, or at least as their kind of headquarters entity going forward.
Great insight, Brian. Well, we're looking forward to the party because on Luke's
See you
post
on
it
the
says
8th.
we're
Yeah.
throwing a party. So
Yeah.
we'll,
You guys
we'll see you
deserve it.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Thank you
PubKey in DC in January, so it's going to be fun. Hoping to just meet everyone who's helped make this possible, give them appreciation from all the people like you that are doing awesome work on moving the industry forward here in the US.
Amazing. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so
Thanks,
much
Brian.
for coming on, Brian, and congrats on coming back to the US.
Yeah, great meeting you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Well, last but not least, we're bringing Cody Carbone back onto the show. He is a bit of a fan favorite, I'm told, to discuss the latest updates on policy. Cody is the CEO of the Digital Chamber, and he was all over the Hill this week, including at the Wednesday meeting hosted by Senator Scott and the Banking Committee. He's also leading some industry letters, which I'm sure we will get into. Let's bring him in, Cody Carbone. Hello.
Hey, Cody, welcome back.
Back. Hey.
What's going on, guys? Fan favorite. That was very
Like Groundhog Day.
You are, Cody. You are. You speak so well on policy, and we're a policy podcast, so we love having you on. But you guys, let's just talk about this week. I mean, you were at the meeting, like I mentioned, on Wednesday with Senator Scott and members of the industry, and the banking industry was also there. What's your takeaway? I know you're feeling optimistic. You and I spoke after the meeting, but from your standpoint, where are we in terms of negotiations? Have those negotiations continued since Wednesday? Where are we as we head into the Christmas break?
We're in a good spot. We are progressing more over the last few weeks than we have been for the last year, which is awesome. It really was, to bring everyone and all the listeners into the room, it really was if you're a political nerd like me or a policy nerd like me, a very beautiful process. It was a legit page turn. It was the industry, and you mentioned the bank industry, and the senators and the staff sitting around a table and flipping through 90 pages of this new draft. We went through all of the provisions that have been added during the bipartisan negotiations. We went through some of the contentious points, what needs to be fixed. And then we left with optimism that, hey, we're actually going to get markups, both in Senate banking, and this was a Senate banking focused meeting, as well as Senate Ag in January, and hopefully in the first 2 weeks in January, which is great. That is the progress we have been looking for. To me, that was the sign that we were going to see success towards enactment early in the new year. You have to go through the markup process to move this bill forward. So we're in a good spot. It was there was a huge reason to be optimistic when we left that meeting.
Cody, for the people who don't know the bill, can you give us a little breakdown of what it entails?
Sure. So market structure is a beast.
Oh, this is market structure related?
Just
This
a skinny little
Okay.
180-page bill. Yeah.
Okay, our listeners know market structure. I
Yeah.
thought it was different to that, but
This
yes.
is market structure. It is intimidating.
Okay.
It is a beast. It is a Goliath of a bill. But I
Yeah.
always say the easiest way to understand it, if you're hearing market structure for the first time, is that this will set the rules of the road if you are issuing a token in the United States, what you need to do and who your regulator is, as well as if you're listing a token in the United States.
Yeah. Okay. I know what market structure is, but that was
We'll
bad of
keep
me.
it
That was
rolling.
really
We'll keep it
bad.
rolling.
No,
I'll
you're
own
good.
it. I will own that I messed that one up.
No,
We're live, so there's no edits on those, so I don't care. Okay, Cody. Anyways, you guys at DC plus the blockchain, a digital chamber plus the Blockchain Association and CCI sent a letter requesting Senator Ag and Banking schedule their markups for January, right? So we don't have a concrete date yet, but it looks like, Scott and Boozman kind of confirmed a January markup. What's the details on that? What's the latest?
Yeah, and I mentioned it was critical that we do this in January. It needed to be early 2026 to continue this progress. The poor staffers in the Senate are going to be working through the holidays. They said as much and lamented as much in the meeting. And then we needed to show progress right out of the gate. We have moved the timeline and when we were going to have these markups, I think 4 or 5 times over the last few months. If you recall back in January when the Trump administration came in, we thought we were going to get a market structure bill by the August recess. So we need to finally put a date on it and say we're going to have these markups early in January. Our hope is that it's going to be the second week of January, that week of January 12th. I'm circling on my calendar the day of January 15th for the committee markups. It is better to do them earlier in the month than later. There is a potential of a government shutdown at the end of January. I don't see a path forward right now where there may not be. And so let's do them earlier in the month. So when shutdown politics come in play that last week of January, and there's already a recess week baked in January for Martin Luther King Day, let's get them done before that to ensure we have progress before the shutdown talk starts.
All right, we're gonna quote you on that, Cody. January 15th.
Do it.
Yeah.
If that happens, we'll play the soundbite again.
If that happens, then I'm definitely the fan favorite of crypto.
There you go.
So yeah, on these predictions and this timeline, Cody, the industry I think has been grappling with what do we do in the absence of market structure, given that initial sort of August timeline. There's been a lot of guidance and things coming out of the regulatory agencies. And then it looks like maybe we do have a deadline for at least a market structure draft. I know earlier this year, the White House was pretty enthusiastic about trying to get a vote before the end of the year, and the shutdown and some of those processes derailed things. There is a fear that we could get another shutdown in January. Do you think we actually can stick? Like, how confident are you in this like January 15 timeline, just knowing everything else going on, on sort of outside of the industry?
I am confident. I wouldn't be as confident if I didn't leave that meeting and there were Republicans and Democrats in the room who are both saying we need to get this done. They have made this a priority. It is not just a priority for the White House, which it is, and not just a priority for Chairman Scott and Chairman Boozman, but there is that group of 12 Democrats that are also saying we want to get this done. And if I didn't see as much progress over the last few weeks in the negotiations, then maybe I would be more pessimistic. But the staffs of the Democratic offices, as well as the Republican offices, are working day by day and sending over texts. You've probably seen, and I'm sure you guys have talked about all the leaks that have happened over the last few weeks with some of the texts, but they're working really, really hard. And it's not a partisan process anymore. And so I feel very optimistic that no matter what happens with the shutdown or other political interests or other legislative proposals that these committees might have to address, this is going to remain the top priority. Everyone wants to get this done early in the new year. There's no secret we're going into an election year. Politics can drive policy, but there is a real motivation to get this done. The White House is in the room. Treasury is in the room. Democrats are in the room. Republicans are in the room. Industry's in the room. All the players are there. So it's the best time to get it done. And there really is motivation to do so.
Yeah, I spoke to Kara Calvert, Coinbase, who, obviously Cody, she was in the room too. And she made a great point. She said, in her 25 years of watching legislation get done in the Senate, she's like, it's hard to remember something that wasn't crisis based that has had this level of momentum behind it. right? I mean, like, let's think about Dodd-Frank, right? Dodd-Frank was crisis-based, and that was slow to get put into law. But we're seeing, this crypto bill. I mean, senators have really only been working on it, at least a bipartisan text, for the better part of, I think, 2.5 months. So, the fact that it has been going through the House, for much longer, it really seems to be, much more of a priority than I think it was, maybe a year or so ago. But let's talk about the sticking points too. I mean, let's talk about stablecoin yield rewards, because you guys were part of a letter this week alongside the Blockchain Association. There's like 125 plus crypto companies that signed on as well, basically urging Senate banking to not limit those rewards, even though the banking industry is lobbying hard for them to do so. Senate banking has two big constituents, right? The banking industry and now the crypto industry. How do they solve this?
It's a great question. The banking industry lost in the Genius Act negotiations. The thing that drives me nuts about this, and I will always be very candid, is that this was not something new that came out after the Genius Act passed. It wasn't all of a sudden that the bill was signed into law and Coinbase started offering rewards to its users that were holding USDC. This is something that was evident that everyone knew about it, including the bank industry and including the lawmakers. The lawmakers were very intentional on how they drew the statutory text to only prohibit that yield that was given directly from the issuers to the holders. It wasn't about people who, like platforms, who were then giving it to their users. It was about directly issuers giving that yield. So everyone knew this existed. This wasn't a loophole, which drives me nuts when I see people say that. We have had really productive meetings with the OCC, with the FDIC, with Treasury, those agencies that are responsible for implementing the Genius Act provisions. And they have all been very vocal and aligned to say, no, rewards should exist. Now, this did come up in the market structure page turn. This is one of the more contentious, outstanding issues that will likely be addressed in market structure legislation. Where I was optimistic leaving that room is that Republicans and Democrats both say that we want parity, that any prohibition that we would extend to crypto or to like a Coinbase paying those rewards, that we would extend to all participants, including banks. That left me optimistic. That's what I want. I want parity. I don't want the banks to have a moat here where they can say, you know what, let's prohibit crypto platforms from issuing this type of rewards or interests or whatever you want to call it, APY, and we're going to do it instead. It will be addressed. I have no idea what the solution looks like. If some of the leaked drafts you can see from Democrats over the last few weeks is like, we need to address the rewards issue, but we want to make sure rewards still exist, which I'm not sure how you do that right now. So we want to make sure rewards still exist. I don't even think it should be relitigated, but we're at the point right now, given how strong the lobbying has been on the other side, that we're having the conversation and it's probably going to be a part of this bill. I just don't know what the solution is right now.
Yeah, Cody, I know State Development Foundation was proud to co-sign that letter. It seems like a no-brainer. I love the point about the banks being part of that process to begin with. I know we're running short on time here, as we usually are when we have you on, and I'm sure we'll continue this conversation. But I want to ask, as constituents of his, Senator Warner had been kind of a sticking point here, particularly from sort of a national security side. Have you seen him and the Dems, that kind of coalition, come around to workable text here? Or do you think there's still work to be done there?
I think there's still work to be done on all the outstanding issues. DeFi is one of them, is definitely one of them. And Senator Warner is leading that conversation from the illicit finance national security side. We didn't get much into the substance of the DeFi sections in the page turn, but I was very optimistic how willing his staff was to continue the conversation and to hear, I would say, the DeFi industry's perspective of the difference between a intermediary that has control of consumer assets versus software developers and an intermediary that does not have control. So I left optimistic that Senator Warner was starting to understand what it means to have peer-to-peer transactions in a DeFi world that doesn't have an intermediary. And that left me optimistic that we'll get sound DeFi provisions in this bill. his staff, as well as every other staff, continues to need education from the DeFi community. They need to show that there are faces behind DeFi, that there are real people working on this, and they're not just shadowy developers underground with like anonymous masks on. So I would encourage all of our DeFi members, I've been telling it, all the DeFi people that listen, like to continue to have conversations with policymakers to tell them why this tech is so important and what they're building. Because that is the missing last 10 yards here in getting this done, is that they're still not hearing about DeFi from the industry, from the actual builders. They're hearing DeFi from the illicit finance headlines that they get in the SCIF in the Intel committee.
Yeah. Well, we really look forward to having you back on when we have all those issues solved on January 15th.
Yeah.
And we can
Talk at any time.
Yeah, we can talk about the new draft. But yeah, thank you so much as always, Cody, for coming on. And we look forward to the next time, man. Appreciate it.
Happy New Year. Merry Christmas.
You too.
You too, Cody.
All right, team.
This is our last show before Christmas.
Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Yeah. It's come up fast. Yeah. I forgot it was December like a week ago.
I know.
Sure.
I know.
Like, it's
I forgot about market structure, Bill. You forgot it's December.
I just don't know what time
Fair
it is.
trade. Yeah.
It's Friday. Yeah, after a long week.
Yeah.
Well, with that in mind, we will wrap for today. But TBD, if we'll do a show next Friday, we'll come back to it. We'll let you know. But in the meantime, have a wonderful Christmas and happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.